Hello and welcome back to the Nutrition and Life podcast. My name is Lisa, I'm your host, and in today's episode, I'm going to share with you 7 ways to think about food to help you avoid an all or nothing mindset. Wow, that was a mouthful. I chose the title, but still. Before we get into today's episode though, please do me a favor, subscribe to the show if you enjoy it, share it on your social media. It is the best way to help us grow. I am speaking to you today from Mexico. By the time this episode is released, I will probably be in Europe. However, right now, as of April, I am speaking to you from Mexico. As you know, these episodes are usually released with a little bit of a time delay, 2 months or so sometimes as well. But nonetheless, I do want to give you a bit of an update, what's happening in my life and my training, etc. So I obviously have moved on from Colombia, but I am very certain that I'm going to go back there probably sooner rather than later. I won't lie, the saying goodbye part is becoming harder and harder as the years of my nomading go on. And so it's kind of become somewhat of a goal that within the next year or two, I at least establish a base. That doesn't mean I like traveling less, but it means that I just am tired of always having to pack everything up, and I would rather feel secure in having a certain base somewhere. And for some reason, Colombia has been calling my name. So this is the plan. And so I actually left part of my stuff, which is not a lot anyway. I have like a suitcase and a half of belongings with me. But I left part of my stuff with one of my friends there, or my Spanish teacher actually. So it's actually a nice feeling leaving something behind and just having that security of like, hey, you're definitely going to go back there, as opposed to just having everything open, which sometimes feels nice too, or has felt nice too. But yeah, as I was saying, as time goes on, I just feel a little bit more of a desire to have a steadier base. Aside from that, when it comes to my nutrition, I always try to go back right into my basics as I have moved from one location to another. So for instance, just had my regular egg whites and oats for breakfast, had my regular lunches, etc. But of course, I also am going to take this time, which is a month here in Mexico, or almost a month, to enjoy some beautiful seafood. And I am familiar with the gym here. I'm super, super, super excited because they actually have 4 hack squat machines. I knew that they had one when I left 2 years ago, and my gym in Colombia does not have a hack squat machine. Why is this so important to me? I feel like I can squat heavier than with a barbell or on the Smith machine while not putting that much pressure on my lower back, or while actually, let me say it differently, while having more stability for my lower back, as they usually have that back pad. And so I'm very excited about that. And they did a bunch of renovations and additions and so on over the last couple of years. And so when I walked in and I saw 4 hack squat machines all slightly different, I was like, yay, this is gonna be amazing. And I felt like a kid in a toy store and it didn't know which one to try out first. So that is my little update. But now let's get into the 7 ways how to think about food to avoid an all or nothing mindset. The first thing that came to mind was that there are certain foods that are just so delicious, and we sometimes think, oh, I need to eat a huge quantity of this. For instance, I love German bread, I love pretzels, I love baking in general, like my grandma's baking and so on. But let's just say something like pretzels or so. Realizing that something like this is still going to be there tomorrow, or the cake that my grandma made. If it's a huge thing, I can ask if I can take something with me for tomorrow. I don't need to think that I need to eat it right now or need to eat a huge quantity of it right now. I can share a pretzel with someone. I can have a small piece of bread and just savor that. And I tell myself this is still going to be there tomorrow, especially if you purchase something like chips, like ice cream or whatever. It's still going to be there tomorrow. In fact, it's going to make you feel like it lasts longer if you savor it that way. And that's another point I will get into a little bit later. But really, just point 1 being internalize that in most cases, when we have the opportunity to eat something really, really delicious, that food is still going to be there sometime soon, maybe not necessarily always tomorrow. So let's just say if it's your favorite Thanksgiving foods, it's still there for an amount of time, at least a couple of days. Or if it's Christmassy foods, or if it's summery foods, or whatever. We live in a world where most things are so accessible all year round anyway. And even if they are seasonal, it's for a while. So please internalize it's still going to be there tomorrow. It might not be as fresh, but you can always purchase it fresh or whatever it might be. But tell yourself it's still going to be there. Stop it with the scarcity mindset where we think or feel, oh, I need to make the most out of this time. Or even when I am in Germany, and obviously this is a limited amount of time throughout the year, I need to internalize that, hey, I'm not just here for one day. Or if I really wanted to, I could find a German bakery in Bogota as well, or somewhere else across the world. There are so many options to find foods internationally nowadays. Point number 2. Sharing is a great opportunity to not just practice kindness, it is also a great opportunity to cut down on some calories. There are a lot of cultures where sharing culture is actually super normal, or is the norm, let's just say more kind of Korean or Japanese style eating, or even Mediterranean cuisine. And as of recent years, I think even in the West, or Germany, USA, etc., this family style sharing has become more popular. However, I think in most situations it's actually falsely applied and not under the premises of what I mean. So I mean, obviously, hey, let's get one dessert and we can have it together. Instead, family style or sharing style nowadays is like, yeah, let's put seven desserts there so everyone can technically have 2.5 sort of thing. And that's really definitely not what I mean. On the contrary, it's like, let's decide on one together. Even in the decision-making process, it's kind of a nice bonding thing. Or, if you're a family, then order 2 desserts and share that between the 5 of you. The tricky part with the sharing sometimes is, how do I log that? How do I track that? Just try to be mindful, or, cut that piece of brownie into 4 and then take a quarter, and then that is your portion of it, instead of just constantly grazing and then losing track of, oh, I had like 1/8 of that flatbread there, and then I had a quarter of the tablespoon of the hummus over here. And so I get that is difficult in some traditions or in certain eating cultures. But just trying to make a bit of a mental picture, or a literal picture, taking a literal picture where you do load up your plate with 1/8 of flatbread and a quarter of a teaspoon of whatever it might be, hummus or so, and then you take a picture of the plate that you're having, or plates that you are having, and then later on, of course, this is not ideal, but then later on tracking how much you roughly think you had. But generally speaking, I think sharing is really, really an underestimated practice when it comes to not thinking like you need to have it all, and more like, hey, let's share, let's just have a little bit. Point number 3 is, when it comes to things that you can basically have at any time. Once again, this sounds similar like point number 1, but it's really not. So if someone is offering you something like rice or bread and it's really nothing special, feel free to say no. And this is irrespective of what they're offering to you. Just in general, you don't have to take everything that is offered to you. Likewise, you don't have to finish everything that is on your plate. We are brought up that way, or many of us, in the sense of saving food, in the sense of, oh, there are starving kids here and there. But I've said numerous times, this food, you eating that food, is not going to help the starving kid in Africa. So yes, save food, don't waste things, save it for tomorrow if you want to or so, but don't feel like you need to eat something just because it's on your plate. And certainly don't feel like you need to do something just to people please. Many of us have people pleasing tendencies. I always like to say I'm a recovering people pleaser, because it's truly something I have worked on a lot over the last few years. And so just my reminder to you that it is it does come down to practice. Like so many things, it comes down to practice, practice, practice. Saying no more often is just as much of a skill as approaching people. I was saying to my best friend the other day that one of my goals this year is just to be more open in real life, like when I'm standing in a coffee shop, paying someone a compliment for their shoes, or like this might sound really silly because I think a lot of culture, like the American culture, for instance, on average, people are great at small talk. Germans, not so much. I, as a German, and just the way that I am, also certainly not so much. I don't really like small talk. For me, it's always kind of was a thought of wasting my time. Now that I want to get better at just normal conversation and talking to people and human interactions, because so much of our lives is on our screen, I really think it's a great skill to have if you can just pay two people a compliment every single day. But anyway, going back to my point of it is a skill. You need to practice saying no more often. How do we do that? Quite often, you can have that conversation in your mind, like, okay, she's probably going to offer me a second piece of cake, or even just thinking about what do I do if my mom says, hey, you've only had a second helping, didn't you like what I made for you? How can you say in a polite way, no, thank you? And this is such a quite often we don't do it decisively enough. We're like, no, I think I'm okay. Of course, she's going to give us another scoop of whatever it is. You need to be decisive. No, thank you. I have had enough. I feel very satiated. I know if I had a little bit more, I'm going to feel like it's too much. And no one can argue with that, because this is how you feel. Come at it from a feeling perspective. No one can argue with that. I've said this a number of times before also, but I do think this point is really, really important. So please practice more and more how to say no, not just when it comes to food, but just in general. Prevent yourself or keep yourself back from saying something too quickly just to please the other person. For instance, also when it comes to invitations, someone might call you and they're like, hey, we're doing this and that on Friday. And you're like, oh, that sounds awesome. And then they're like, oh, you want to come along? And right away, our instinct, people pleaser instinct, is to say, yeah, of course, that sounds great. And then you're like realizing, oh, I really actually have a very busy week. That was going to be my only evening to recharge. So instead of automatically always responding, just take a moment and say, I'll get back to you tomorrow. And then you have a time to think about it, time to think about your response so much more, and you're not going to make it in that people-pleasing tendency mode. So that was point number 3. Moving on to point number 4. And this was something that I alluded to at the beginning, which is cutting something down into smaller pieces and eating it more slowly and in a calm state makes things go way longer. You can cut down, and always sounds ridiculous. I don't mean it in an obsessive dieting culture kind of way, because if you have dieted to very lean levels of body weight, you probably did that automatically, because it's almost like a human instinct where we just cut down things into the smallest pieces. They actually did a study called the Minnesota starvation experiment. This was done in, I think, the 60s. Would definitely not be passing through approval these days, FDA approval these days, in terms of a study being conducted. But they put people through, very, very low calorie diet, like grown men just consuming about 1,200 calories for about half a year. So they almost got down to like concentration camp. I don't want to say leanness because that sounds too positive, but concentration camp body weight levels. And some of these people reported doing things like cutting a pea into 4 pieces to make it last longer. And then, of course, things like licking the plate and so on. Not that there's anything wrong with licking the plate. I will fully admit that I have done that and still do that every now and then when something is very delicious. But no, going back to my point, you can break down your piece of chocolate instead of like swallowing it in one and then gulping it down whilst you're driving and doing 5 other things, hardly noticing that that's even gone into your mouth, let alone your stomach. If you break it down into smaller pieces, into 4 pieces, and you savor it, you really try to be mindful and practice, like, what does this taste like? Just waiting, not instead of thinking about the next bite already. Often we do that. We take a bite and we already think about the next bite, or we already load our fork up with the next load. Again, I do that too sometimes, and sometimes we do need to quote unquote eat more quickly, and we don't have that much time. But if we want to make something last longer, savoring it and really slowing down can absolutely help us from wanting to eat the whole thing. And meanwhile, we're also like registering more and more if we're already full, or that we might be getting full or so. So that again prevents us from wanting to, or thinking we need to eat the whole block of chocolate, and perhaps being able to just enjoy 3 pieces and be like, this was great. This lasted me for 20 minutes, and my feeling of satiation is now registering, so I can move on and go about my day. So really speed is very important. And of course, with that, food volume also, not just necessarily into the aspect of cutting things down, but more in the sense of you can have a 350 calorie salad, huge bowl with chicken, very satiating, that takes a long time to be broken down in your stomach, making you feel satiated for longer. And you can also have a 350 calorie teeny tiny sandwich, which is going to be digested or almost digested out of your stomach and being absorbed in like an hour or less than that. That doesn't mean that more volume is always better, especially if we're trying to maintain weight or even gain muscle. But just generally speaking, we're obviously talking about all or nothing mindset here, and more in the sense of eating less rather than more. If you are on that other end of the spectrum of like, hey, I should be eating more, or even again in deep down into a dieting phase, as humans, we do crazy things. Like people eat, I have heard of people eating like 3 large bowls of romaine lettuce, like large. I'm talking about huge salad bowls with crappy Walden Farm 0-calorie syrup, just because they think, oh, this is hardly any calories and it's the only thing that makes me satiated. We don't want that. You're going to be blocked up for several days if you do that, or if anything, you're going to be very, very bloated and not feeling good. And just alone from a mindset perspective, that certainly is not the way to go either. Again, that would be the example of all rather than nothing. But yes, so that was point number 4. Moving on to our last 3 points of this topic. Purchasing smaller packets in and of themselves, or like individual servings, let's just say like this tiny block of chocolate of like 30 grams, as opposed to or like an ounce or whatever it is, as opposed to the huge king size bar. Yeah, of course, per gram or per ounce, it's probably cheaper to purchase the super family whatever size. But if you're coming at it from a place of quote unquote, I need to eat everything that I have in my house or that I'm purchasing, this can be a good strategy to simply cut down. Likewise with chips, if you're just purchasing the individual block or so, that can be a way to learn how to have a smaller quantity of something and letting it be good enough. Of course, it's still a way to somewhat restrict yourself, so it's not directly the same as learning to just break off an ounce of chocolate from your huge block and being able to put that away. But especially in the beginning, building that confidence for yourself of like, okay, I only had that small piece and it felt like it was enough, or it felt like it was better than nothing. That can still be a huge breakthrough. For many people, that abstaining initially or just not having it in the house is definitely not a bad strategy at all. However, if you are doing this strategy because you're telling yourself, whenever I have this in the house, I have to have it all, or I can't have this in the house at all because otherwise I'm going to be the one eating it and not my family. If this is your internal self-talk, we do need to work on the talk. We don't necessarily need to work on, hey, you need to have this in your house. I'm forcing you now to purchase this just to tempt yourself and work on that. No, that's not what I'm saying. We do want to work on that belief that you have, and in my opinion, somewhat of a limiting belief, where you're telling yourself, whenever I have this, I have to have it all. Because that's the same sort of talk that we have as whenever it's the holiday, I'm gaining 5 pounds. Whenever I'm going on vacation, I'm gaining 5 pounds. I was actually just having a conversation with one of my clients the other day who was going to go on vacation. I could hear, like, even though she said, I'm going to be mindful, I'm going to try to track here and there, I could hear that she kind of gave herself a little bit of permission of, yeah, I'm going to put on weight during this time. And she is someone with whom I have been working a lot on all or nothing mindset. And so far we have been doing great, like on weekend trips, or even like weeks where she has had 5 meals out because of social events or work or so. She has done great. But all those were times where she was able to work the rest of the day around it. This was going to be a resort where all the meals were provided for her or being cooked for her. So I just said to her, that's great. I think being mindful and just making good decisions is awesome. I personally would be over the moon if you were still going to track, even if it is at higher calories. I just think that will help with keeping the awareness. The last thing that I would want is for you to come back at the weight that we started at 10 weeks ago. And then we're working that down again until your next trip in 10 weeks. And then we're repeating that cycle over and over and over. That's exactly what we don't want. So I don't mind if you come back a little bit heavier, just from retaining water and whatever. But overall, I do hope that you are staying somewhat in moderation. And we put her at maintenance calories. It's not like I was asking her to be in a really low calorie budget for the time being. And she came back and she was so excited, saying that this was probably the best, or not just probably, this was the best that she has done on vacation. Not just that, it actually transferred over into her wanting to work out for the very first time while she's on vacation also, and she got in like 5 workouts. So very, very big breakthrough there. Speaking of breakthroughs, point number 6, if you do mess up once, just move on. Don't dwell on it and do your best going forward. Probably a lot of you guys have heard that example of if you have a slash tire, or if you have a flat tire, there's no need to slash all the others as well. This would just be totally stupid. And I think that makes so much sense to others or to us as humans, but as at the same time, we think, oh, I've already messed up this meal, and it's Thursday. I'm going to give myself a free pass for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then start back up on Monday. No, your next meal is already the opportunity to break that cycle, to not put on that much more weight, because it's hardly ever that first messing up that's really down spiraling us. It is usually that third piece of cake, that second day of just not giving a crap at all and really, really eating whatever we want and quote unquote binging. So yeah, it's not the first thing it's that you might have done wrong. It is the second thing. This reminds me of a quote that I heard the other day from James Clear. I'm curious to hear actually what you guys think of it, because I think on the one hand, I agree. On the other hand, I don't. I better share it. So it goes like this. A habit missed once is a mistake. A habit missed twice a habit missed twice is the beginning of a new habit. So once again, a habit missed once is a mistake. A habit missed twice in a row is the beginning of a new habit. And I mean, it really depends on the context. Obviously, if you miss a workout twice, happens, especially if it's for a particular reason that you have a lot going on at work or whatever it might be. But with other things, it's like, it's not, for my taste, it's not quite allowing enough for individual situations or grace for yourself. Like, let's say you're trying to meditate 5 times a week, and you miss that or mess that up 2 weeks in a row, and you only manage to do 3 or 4 meditations. For me, that's still awesome. I mean, it's not what you set yourself out to do, but is it better than not doing any meditations? And does that mean that you're going to regress from there? No. But I think the point that he's trying to make is simply Oh, someone dropped something. I think the point that he's trying to make is simply that sometimes when we start cutting ourselves slack once, it's almost like we're giving ourselves permission to do that again with something maybe bigger the next time, and then bigger yet again the next time. And before we know it, it starts to be a new habit, or it means that we have completely dropped the habit that we were trying to build. So simple example, oh, I never drink. And then suddenly, oh, I'll make an exception. And then suddenly that becomes once a month. And then suddenly that becomes every 2 weeks. And then it becomes every week. And then it becomes every weekend twice. And then before you know it, you have your daily glass of wine to relax on the porch or so. So I do see where he's coming from. But yeah, if you have any thoughts on this, of course, I would love to hear. So please let me know. Let me know through the comments, or let me know through Instagram, or however you would like. I would love to hear from you. The last point that I wanted to make in this how to think about food in order to avoid all or nothing thinking, or an all or nothing mindset, is just the reminder that the more satiating whole food meals you eat, the less you're going to crave processed things. This does take time. Again, this doesn't mean that we need to be eating clean, quote unquote, clean, the whole time. On the contrary, not what I'm saying. But if you're currently someone who always adds stevia and like always has to have some sort of flavor and sweetness to everything literally, and you're craving a lot of those processed things, it is because your palate is accustomed to that. So just like we can wean ourselves off of having our coffee with 2 teaspoons of sugar, you might reduce that to 1.5, and then after a couple of weeks to 1, and then to half, and hopefully at some point nothing at all. Just like that, you can also do that with salt, with the taste for processed foods, with the sweetener, with sugary things, and so on. So just be patient with yourself. I think I've shared this numerous times also, that when I first started with flexible dieting, I came out of a sort of a paleo phase. And during that, I was very strict with myself. And if I would have something sugary, I'd really beat myself up. So then learning and finding out that, hey, you can technically eat anything that you want. You just can't have everything or as much of it as you want. You just need to moderate your quantity. That made me go a little bit crazy, and I had Pop-Tarts, I had cereal, I had like all these kind of things, and I needed to find, after a while, I noticed that wasn't that great for my gut, and I was actually craving more of those things too. So to my point, I was feeling less satiated and I wanted more of them, and that made me aware of, okay, I didn't have that to that extent or in this form when I was actually adhering or eating more whole foods. So the more whole foods, we're also obviously going to have more actual fiber, not just that crappy fiber that they put in protein bars or drinks or so, but actual fiber. We're going to have more to chew on, to process in and of itself. So that can literally like basically recreate our palate. Give yourself time and be patient with yourself. But yeah, so my 7 points for ways to think about food in order to avoid an all or nothing mindset was: number 1, realizing that even if something is really delicious, in most cases, we have the opportunity to easily eat that food again sometime soon, or maybe even at any time. Point number 2, sharing is caring, and it doesn't just come down to being social, being connected, etc., but use half portions or whatever you want in order to minimize calories or reduce calories when you are eating out in particular, but make sure that that family style sharing doesn't mean you actually have more than a portion. Point number 3, realize that you need to learn how to say no more often. Not everything that is offered to you, you need to eat, and definitely not everything that is on your plate you don't need to finish. So often when it comes to learning how to say no, it really is more about how we say something, and also realizing that, yes, this might provide a little bit of discomfort for you and the other person now, but isn't that better than having the discomfort in the long run where you still feel terrible about your choice in a day or maybe even in a month time when the weight is not coming off. Point number 4 was cutting things down into smaller portions can make them go a longer way. Also, like what plate are you serving your food on can, like if you have a smaller plate, can make it feel like it's a larger portion, and working with the right amount of food volume in order to feel more satiated and crave less. Point number 5 was purchasing smaller packages and individual servings of things can sometimes help us learn that we can have a smaller amount. And then when we are detecting internal self-talk where we're saying things like, I have to have it all, or whenever I can't have this in the house because otherwise I'm gonna eat it all, that might have been true for the past. That doesn't mean that it's true for the future. And you can rewrite that in your mind, but only if you are canceling out these beliefs and how you're talking to yourself about that as well. Point number 6, realizing that if you mess up once, just move on, don't dwell on it, and do your best going forward, because literally everything matters. So, even stopping yourself in that moment is a huge win. Point number 7, eat more satiating whole foods in order to crave less of the very craveable things and of the things that are essentially designed to make us want to overeat. I hope you found this helpful. If you enjoy these kind of how-to episodes or more also mindset-related episodes, do let me know. I would very much appreciate your feedback. I thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.